Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Light Road, or in actuality Sheep Island Road in Summerville, South Carolina. It runs behind a big shopping area and past a few neighborhoods before crossing over the interstate, and then becomes a mildly curved dirt road for almost 3 miles if I remember correctly. I personally think the legend built around it is kind of lame, but there's definitely something strange going on out there. I've experienced it several times with a few friends. Generally, we'll pile a bunch of people into a truck and head out there around 10 p.m. at the earliest. Supposedly the later the better, and climb up the hill. Some cops hired someone to bore out 2 ditches on either side of the road and dump the dirt right in the middle of the road, so you can't drive out there anymore. You have to walk and see if we can catch a glimpse of the light. Sometimes you can from there, sometimes you can't. If we're not lucky enough to see it from there, we just start walking down the road until it shows up again. It takes different forms, and sometimes changes forms multiple times in one night. I've seen it as a distant yellowish-white glimpse in the distance, a distant pale red light, a bright and quite large sparkling yellow and white cluster of sparkling lights. Like a never-ending firework. And the coolest one, the road kind of bends as it goes, is a form that looks like a train with its headlights coming around a corner at an almost blinding level of light. Contrary to the story I linked, the light has never chased me or any of my friends. It just kind of exists, and you can never seem to get any closer to it, kind of like this phenomenon.
Witnessed an energy being before. Posted on here a while back. I've never been this scared in my life. Don't feel like typing it all out, but pretty much this. Had to drive to Myrtle Beach, a 9-hour drive. Dead tired. Get to the hotel with my brother and he instantly goes to sleep. Have TV on. Take my glasses off and lay down. Feel so exhausted I'm pretty certain I'm going to fall asleep instantly. The moment I put my head on the pillow, I get full-blown goosebumps. Every hair on me stands up. Adrenaline pumping. I can hear my brother snoring. I look at the door that exits into the hallway and I can feel, since there is now a third something in our room. Literally start panicking, but I'm paralyzed with fear because I don't understand what I'm seeing. I'm looking at something that I know is there, but I can't see it. It starts walking past our beds and any doubts I have are instantly squashed. The fucking TV dims as it walks in front of it, like the entire hotel loses power for a split second. It stands on the corner closest to my bed. I stare off, not knowing what to do. There's something in the room and I can't physically touch it. All the lighting is fucking off, like it's pushing the light away or absorbing it. Light from the TV is not bouncing into the corner anymore. It grows larger, practically consumes the corner of the room with darkness. This goes on for about 2 to 3 minutes. It feels like a lifetime. After a while it just goes through the wall into the next room. Can't sleep at all. Managed to get the courage to get up after 30 minutes and take a shower. Barely slept that night. I've had sleep paralysis before. This wasn't it. Humans have some kind of sixth sense to tell when something is watching them, I'm absolutely certain. That was back in 2017 and I've been researching the paranormal ever since.
About 10 years old in Myrtle Beach with my family. Parents wouldn't let me in the hot tub because I was too young. This was 1996 and people were dumb. Stormed off to the pool and no one was around. Next thing I remember is awakening at the bottom of the pool where the intake is. I was sitting cross-legged staring up at the water moving and light beaming in. I had no inclination of moving or swimming to the surface and my body felt warm and content. I wasn't panicked. Suddenly, I see the water break and someone has dived towards me. An arm goes around my chest and I am suddenly beside the pool again. I'm perfectly fine. I remember seeing a man with incredible red hair. Freckles, tall, very pale, white. He said to me, "Stay away from water." I didn't see him leave or even out of the pool. I just have a memory of him and what he said. I ran back to my parents and told them everything.
Yeah, sure, Dan. You're just having a tantrum because you can't come in here.
I was fucking pissed. I reminded my parents of what happened for over 20 years because they didn't believe me. They finally believed me. This wasn't some fictitious story of the day. Might seem like a lame story. But like everyone's personal journey in life, this impacted me significantly. A large part of my faith in God comes from that day when I was alone and almost drowned.
22. Always been really good with a bow. Also fit, agility LV90. Head in innawoods in South Carolina with pick related, nothing else. 2015. The forest here is huge. You can move for ages before you even meet a trail or road. About 1.5 miles in. 1930 and it's getting dark. Begin hunting. Find deer tracks. Find deer, kill arrow.exe, skin, cut up and collect meat. Take back to the OK area. Build fire with sticks either side, skewer meat and place it above. It's 20:30 by now and it's dark, short of moonlight. I'm just about to strike a match when I hear a distant screeching sound of sorts. It's a long, shrieking wail. What the fuck? Grab a bow, stay low. I moved in the direction of the sound for what seemed about 1/3 of a mile. I can see a light up ahead, fire or torches, something all right. Climb the tree for a better look since it's behind bushes. From here I can see at least 8 figures standing around a bonfire. Gray robes with hoods, faces in shadow. They're completely silent. I can hear the fire crackling but no voices. Another figure enters from somewhere to the right carrying what seems to be a dead rabbit. Toss it into the fire. All 9 of them shriek the same as I first heard but a lot louder because close. It was getting a bit windy and I was already a little freaked out so I went to climb down. The branch I put my foot on cracks slightly. Despite it being such a small sound, all 9 of them go silent instantly and turn to face me. Shit. Slide down a tree. Sprint.exe through the woods back to my camp. Grab meat and leg it. No sign of being followed, made it about another mile or so into the forest within an hour. Eventually stop running by the stream. Decide to make camp, cook meat, put fire out and sleep. Not much happened for the rest of the trip but it was some freaky shit. Stayed another day hunting.
I got a quick one. Here goes. Be me in Cub Scouts. Around 3rd grade or so. I live in the low country of South Carolina. One day our scout leader, I forgot the proper terminology, literally been out of scouts since elementary school, and decides to have a large camp out on his property. Scouts and parents were invited as well. The day comes, everyone arrives. The place is basically several acres of cornfields, wheat, tallgrass shit, with the dude's house on one end and the campsite on the other. The perimeter of the land is a forest, with the campsite being a half circle of cleared forest. This whole area is about 5 miles away from civilization. About 10 to 15 kids with their parents show up for the night. I'm gonna skip the events we did that day because they don't matter and I don't remember. Anyways, night sets in. One of the scout leaders asked me and 2 other kids to pick up firewood from his truck. We grab our flashlights and head out, probably 1/3 of a mile walk to the truck. We take a path through the cornstalks. The path is mowed down, maybe 3 yards wide. Then I see something. I just want to mention that I remember this moment clear as day. This shit happened when I was a kid and I'm 21 now. I lift up my flashlight to see what it is. All I saw was a tail sticking out of the corn stalks about 15 feet in front of me. It basically looked like a rat's tail. The color was whitish pinkish, but the base of the tail looked like it was at least 3 feet off the ground. Whatever that thing was just kept moving into the corn stalks, dragging its tail behind. The other 2 kids and I confirmed that we all saw it. I was too scared to look into the corn stalks. We finished the errand and came back with firewood. Nothing strange happened the remainder of the trip. I never got to see the body of the thing, but I could not think of an animal where I live that has a tail like that and is that tall.
My husband, mother, and I were all on vacation at an oceanfront hotel in Myrtle Beach a couple of years ago. My mother and I have been staying at this particular hotel annually since I was 4. They had recently built a new, larger building and this was our 2nd year staying in the new hotel suite. There were 2 bedrooms, separated by a door and a mini kitchen. My husband and I got the bedroom directly facing the ocean. At the foot of the bed was a large wardrobe with a chair in front of it. On the other side of that, an entertainment center. And past that, the sliding glass door that led to our balcony. We went to sleep one night and I was awoken sometime around 3 in the morning by a sliding sound. Having been plagued by nightmares as a child, I startled pretty easily and sat upright. The sliding glass door was open, and beyond it I could see the blackness of the night sky and the blackness of the sea, interrupted only by occasional whitecaps. My husband checked the door to my mother's half of the suite and it was still closed and latched. I had moved to sit on the chair at the foot of the bed, shaking. I was shaking because, from the sandy concrete outside the glass door, small, dark, wet footprints made their way into our hotel room, soaking into the carpet and stopping at the foot of our bed. At this point, my husband quietly went over and closed the sliding glass door, shutting out the sound of the ocean outside, and turned back towards me, exasperatedly exclaiming that he didn't know what to do and it was probably just sea spray, and he stopped complaining abruptly. Not a common behavior for him, and just sort of froze in place. I remember intensely the feeling of everything clicking together and realization hitting me as I followed his gaze and realized that with the sound of the ocean now sealed behind the door, I could hear the quiet dripping of something right by my ear. "She's above me, isn't she?" I whispered. Now, here is where it gets either stranger or less strange, depending on how you wish to interpret things. As soon as I spoke, I began to look up, only to be shaken awake by my husband who was lying in bed behind me. It was the same time it had been in my dream. I was shivering violently because whatever I had seen above me was so terrifying that I can't adequately articulate how it felt. Pure, primal, unfiltered fear with no conscious thought. I shakily asked why he woke me up, realizing that he had been asking.
Are you okay?
He told me that I was twitching violently, crying and making strange little whimpering, wheezing noises. I sat up in bed and looked around to reassure myself. We had left the sliding glass door open the night before. And sure enough, the ocean and sky beyond were dark, but this time, we were back on the 4th floor, which is where we were supposed to be. There were no footprints, but everything was in exactly the same place it had been in the nightmare. Even the furniture whose position I hadn't bothered to memorize and bags that we'd tossed on the sofa the evening before. It was like the nightmare happened in real time. And then when I was woken up, whatever had come out of the ocean to stay with us retreated. I've lived with a lifetime of nightmares, but none have ever adhered so closely to the laws of the waking world with so few changes nor affected me so violently. I can remember every detail of that night to this day, and I wonder what I saw before my husband woke me. The footprints looked like a child's bare feet, and in the dream, I knew it was a she, before I ever looked up.
Palmetto Bugs. I grew up in South Carolina around Myrtle Beach, the place where Palmetto Bugs got their name. These fuckers were pure nightmare fuel, individually fucking huge flying cockroaches. However, one evening when I was 7, my family and I went to an outdoor bistro near the grandstand. Things were great. I was enjoying my bowl of French onion soup and having a good time talking to my sisters. The sun was starting to set, so it was getting a bit dark. That's when I felt something crawling on the top of my foot. I looked down and it's a moderately sized palmetto bug. I wasn't terrified, but I hated the fucker, so I kicked him off. I went back to eating as I felt another one on my foot. I looked down beneath my table and nearly freaked the fuck out. There were like 10 of those fuckers hanging out under the table. My parents and older sisters were alarmed, but laughed it off and told me to calm down. "You gotta expect a few palmetto bugs," they said. They soon came to regret that statement as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the outdoor lights came on. Suddenly screams from other tables followed by lots of flickering noises. I knew what the fuck was up, and my parents realized, too. Under the table were hundreds of palmetto bugs swarming for scraps. On the walls of the outer bistro crawled many more, flying around at will. Thousands of giant flying palmetto bugs had decided to dine on moderately priced French cuisine that night. They were crawling on my legs, in my fucking hair, all over the table. They were everywhere. It was worse than that one scene in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom where she has to push the switch in that hole full of crawling bugs. We, and the rest of the customers, flocked to the safety of our cars as roaches practically devoured that bistro. To this day, I fucking am terrified of roaches.
My God. I went to high school in Myrtle Beach from 93 to 97, yes, I'm old, and I remember that French bistro. My family lived on 69th Avenue and I loved that place. Reading your story about the palmetto bug fucking apocalypse literally gave me chills. I don't think I can ever eat French onion soup again now. I would have had a semi-psychotic breakdown had that been me. Props to you for not losing your shit. Another story out of Myrtle Beach. This same awesome beach house we lived in. I'm in the den one night, minding my own business, studying while my dad and stepmom get high in their bedroom. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see chilling next to me on the couch the biggest, furriest brown spider I'd ever seen. I jumped off the couch and ran out of the room, screaming bloody murder. Subsequently seriously annoying my dad, who I guess lost his good buzz after his maniac teenage daughter lost her mind over a spider. Seriously, fuck spiders and Palmetto Bugs. They're assholes.
I started reading this thread last night and got so genuinely frightened. I had to stay up until the sun rose. I'm glad it's still here though and not 404. Does anyone know if there are stories like this originating in South Carolina? I basically live in a small subdivision out in the middle of the boonies, about 20 to 30 minutes away from civilization. I've heard some freaky shit in the woods behind my house, but now that I think about it, we moved here in 2007. Living in these townhouses, our neighbor is an older woman in her late 50s. Well, when we first moved in, she was kind and came over to welcome us. Saw her when I used to get up for school in the morning going off to work. She always went out of her way to greet us. Used to see her working out in her garden all the time out back. Had grown children and grandkids that would come visit occasionally. Then one night while my parents are gone, she comes over beating at our door frantically. My grandma answered and she was begging us to call the police because she thought something was in her house. Right then my parents came home. Her other neighbor had a gun and came over, so Dad and him went and checked every inch of her house. Told us not to worry and she thanked us profusely. Few years pass and slowly but surely it's as if she disappears. Never see her around, not leaving for work but her car is still gone. Her family stops coming around, garden unattended. Months pass. Then one morning I got up for school around 5 a.m. See her outside in the backyard, just standing there, staring at the woods, unmoving with her back to me. Hair is ruffled, robe askew. I stared and wondered what she was doing. Shrugged it off and went to get ready, then came back an hour later. She was still there. Same spot. This went on for days. Same time every morning, staring at the woods. Finally I got the courage to poke my head out and ask if she was all right. She said nothing. Kind of jerked about, like she was twitching. This ritual went on for weeks. I never told anyone about what I saw, but eventually she wasn't out there anymore. I honestly don't know what happened to her or if she even lives there anymore. It's been a few more years since then. I'm 20 now and out of high school. Going to move with my boyfriend to Montana soon and now I'm extremely nervous because of the area. What with the forests and everything. Does anyone know if there's stories from Montana or have any advice about living there? I don't want to be taken by a skinwalker. Sorry my story wasn't very exciting, but before now I've known nothing of these creatures. I'm staying up until dawn again it seems.
It is well known among a very small and guarded group that these so-called ghouls live underground and use a labyrinthine system of tunnels developed over thousands of years to circumnavigate the entire globe. There was a thread started a few weeks back by an individual in Florida who saw the same creature darting under a street lamp and down an embankment where it paused briefly to look into a house through an open window before disappearing into a hole in an adjacent vacant lot. In 2002, I too caught a glimpse of a similar creature in rural South Carolina while I was on a solo kayak trip in an isolated tributary of a large river that nearly spans the entire state. As I was negotiating a bend in the river, I spotted furtive movements on the reed-shrouded bank about 30 yards ahead of me. I paused there and heaved on a sandy outcrop. As I looked more closely at the location of the movement, I clearly saw a figure approximately the size of a medium-sized dog crouching on its hind legs. Its body was grayish in tone and it seemed nearly hairless. It was looking south and in that position I was able to see its head in profile. The cranium was oddly elongated with a sloping forehead. The chin protruded dramatically and curved upward to meet the upper lip. Its eyes seemed to be unblinking and black. Not a moment later it slipped almost silently head first into the water. I waited in my spot for some time. Honestly, I was too scared to advance downriver, but ultimately I had no choice. After regaining my composure and formulating in my head how exactly I could use my paddle as a weapon, I slowly pushed off and allowed my kayak to drift slowly down to the spot where I saw the creature. The only evidence of it having been there was a semicircular depression in the reeds. I surmised that it had probably been crouching there for a considerable length of time, probably hunting prey. I spent the rest of a long day on that tributary. I never saw the creature again.
Guess I'll just start with the Thunderbird. And it's worth saying I saw most of the stuff from my deck when I was 21 over a 2-night period. Only other sighting was last year in July and my younger brother saw it with me. So yeah, the Thunderbird. Was out on my deck smoking a cig, relaxing with my dog. Was pretty late and I can't remember the exact time, but it had to be after 1 a.m. So, I'm smoking my cig and my dog just hops up and starts barking at nothing, don't pay it attention like normal. She gets more insistent and I hear what I can only describe as a stereotypical eagle screech from a movie or something. So now I'm definitely paying attention. I notice my dog is looking up at the sky from the end of the deck. So I walk over there and hear another screech in the process. I see something I can only describe as a fucking huge bird. No moon, but regardless I can make out the full shape of it and see its wings flapping. How the fuck can I see its wing flapping? That was the thought going through my head. It was dark as hell outside. The lights from the middle of town gave it a dull reddish-orange glow, but I should not have been able to make out the wings moving on any bird native to the east coast of America. Looked just like the huge black bird when you look up Thunderbirds on Google. I watched it flap away and my dog just kept barking at it. Still trips me the fuck out to this day. I live in South Carolina if anyone was wondering.
Well, here it goes. This takes place in Chesterfield County, directly in the Sandhills. This part of the area I live in is very rural, farmland, hunting land and government-protected land as far as the eye can see. My uncle tells me and my cousins this story almost every Thanksgiving and Christmas, sometimes during late-night catfishing. Back in the early 90s, my uncle and his friends would drive around this area late at night and just cruise around, and one night in particular, they decided to try and find out if one of the local ghost stories are true. This place they were going to was an old church that's in the middle of nowhere and was supposedly cursed by the local Native Americans a very long time ago, and if you go there late at night and flash your headlights at windows of the church, the curtains would move like someone peering out of them. My uncle and his friends pulled up to this church at 1 or 2 in the morning, 3 to 4 miles away from the nearest house, this will be important later, and started flashing their headlights at the windows and nothing happened. My uncle and his friends decide to move the car to the other side of the parking lot facing the woods. They're talking to each other while my uncle rests his arm on the car door. My uncle suddenly feels a cold hand resting on his arm and he quickly looks up. He sees an elderly man that he describes as an exact clone of Uncle Jesse from the Dukes of Hazzard. My uncle described the freakiest part about him was that he was an elderly man, miles from the nearest home, walking around late at night, and that his eyes were blacker than the night itself. The man asked them, "What are y'all doing here?" My uncle says, "Me and my buddies were just trying to see if a ghost story was real." He responds with "Okay." He stares down at my uncle for seconds as what he described as a stare that went straight through him, and walks in front of the car and stops, then slowly walks into the woods just to vanish into thin air when he reaches the tree line. My uncle to this day still gets goosebumps when he tells this story. I have another story that happened to my uncle, if you want to hear it. This story takes place a few years after the first story. My uncle recently got married to my aunt and was given a house with around 100 to 120 acres. I was a little kid at the time, but I remember it being surrounded by thick woods and full of wildlife, and a big front porch. My dad, Papa, other uncle and him would find arrowheads and old coins. They also found a brass shotgun shell, which I think we have somewhere. I'll send a picture of it if I find it. Everything was fine until they found burial mounds in the corner of his property, then all hell broke loose. A few nights after that, he came home late from work one night, and as he was about to get out of the car, he heard something big moving and growling in the tree line around his home. It made him feel a bit nervous, but he thought it could have been a coyote or a wildcat. He gets out of his car and the growling stops and everything goes silent. He hurries to the door and unlocks it. Let me explain the layout of this house real quick. My uncle was the side door that opened up to his kitchen. He unlocks and opens the door, and just before he walks in, a hand grabs his shoulder. My uncle freezes and thinks to himself, if I'm fast enough I could use my key to slash this guy and lock the door. He closes his eyes and turns around and slashes his car key. He opens his eyes and nothing. He just stood there, maybe out of awe or fear. He snaps out of it and grabs the cordless mobile phone and runs to his car and drives to the end of his driveway. He calls his friend to come meet with him while he waits for my aunt to get off of work. They sit for 3 hours until my aunt gets home. He gives the rundown to my aunt and they decide to spend the night at my grandparents' house. The next day, they go back and everything is normal until that night. That night they heard heavy footsteps walking from one side of the porch to the other. My uncle went and checked and saw no one. They go back to bed and it starts again. He checks and you guessed it, not a soul. My uncle just decided to ignore it and went to bed. They lived there for a year until they moved. They heard the stomping, growling and rustling in the tree line, smelled coffee and burning tobacco until they moved out. They told me the best thing to do in that situation is just ignore it. I'll send a picture when I find the shotgun shell.
Messie is an oceanic, reptilian cryptid that is said to live in Lake Murray, South Carolina. Its name is a portmanteau of Murray and Nessie. Appearance: Messie is a lake monster which shares many similarities to Scotland's Nessie, although it is said to be more aggressive in nature. It has been reported as somewhat serpentine in appearance, but is believed to be a plesiosaur like the creature from Loch Ness. Encounters: the first report of Messie comes from one Gilbert Little of Irmo, South Carolina, in 1933. Little claimed to have spotted the creature while boating on the lake with his family as a child, stating that if he had known of an aggressive aquatic creature in residence in Lake Murray, then he would never have gone near the water. Another notable encounter with the creature occurred on April 3, 2012. Two boys, Gray Ward, 15, and Lai Ward, 12, were fishing on the lake when a large animal bit Gray's line. Gray broke his wrist in a vain attempt to save his rod, and the creature dragged the boat over a mile across the lake. Eventually, Gray released the rod, which immediately disappeared beneath the surface.
Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch, Yowie. We all know these hominid creatures. Yet, few has ever known of the Bushman, a Neanderthal, erectus type of human. They aren't as hairy as Bigfoot, but smarter, shorter and denser. They live in cold mountainous regions down to South Carolina, often hiding away from any sort of civilization. They're hard to spot because they can make deer skin clothing and add all types of natural plants, hence the name Bushman. Native Americans say they can be more peaceful or stealthy on the flatter, coastal zones, but more aggressive in mountainous and Arctic zones. Early explorers are often scared of these beings, claiming they know pottery and tool making and simple things, yet they look way different. Description: they are reported to have strong, bulky jaws, more of an elongated head, broad nose, high voice in summer and spring, extremely deep voice in winter and autumn. Their pigment is described to be white and hair is similar to that of African American hair, but longer. They have big chests and are extremely strong. They have an interesting language of sounds which are bowls and other vocals. They have simple and advanced camouflage clothes, making them excellent hunters. Sightings and folklore: according to some Native American legends, these humanoids were once like us but fell to isolation and were cursed by the gods because of it. Ever since then, the humanoids have different relationships with humans. An explorer stated, "I came to the white-caped land, only to see a stranger with piercing eyes, shouting at me. With a thrust, he hit me in the leg. Although odd-looking, I knew I had to leave, or I would die." A later report stated in the vast afar, northern mountains, an isolated human was practically invisible due to his camouflage. The latest report was in Greenland. A man was going to ride his dog sled to the nearest part store, which was approximately 3 hours away. About an hour into it, a random man, with a broad nose, big rib cage and elongated head jumped out and screamed as he took a dead carcass.
The Folly Beach Monster is the nickname given to a globster that was found on Friday, March 22, 2012, on Folly Beach in South Carolina. Initially believed by locals to have been a sea monster, it was quickly discovered to be nothing more than the carcass of a rare fish. Description: the monster consisted of a large, tan and green corpse sporting what appeared to be vestigial fins which had been washed up on the South Carolina beach. The prominent rows of bony scutes running the length of its body lent it a somewhat prehistoric look, a fact which led the locals to declare it a sea monster. Explanation: After photographs of the monster began to circulate, Dr. Shane Boylan of South Carolina Aquarium stepped forward to state that the carcass was in fact that of an Atlantic sturgeon, a prehistoric yet extant species of bony fish native to the waters of the region which can reach 15 feet in length. Explaining that the fish could be easily identified by the shape of its body and the presence of the bony scutes, Dr. Boylan posited that confusion may have arisen from the fact that the carcass had developed a necrotic tan, a discoloration of the skin due to prolonged exposure of dead flesh to the sun.
In South Carolina, a white, orange-eyed thunderbird has been reported to encounter drivers traveling throughout the state. Reports of mysterious bird-like creatures date back to the Native Americans of the region. The Santee are a Native American people of South Carolina. According to a few great stories of the Santee people, gathered and edited by Robert Frericks and Paula Olson, the Wakinyan are thunderbirds. Kinyan is the Santee verb to fly, and these creatures are represented as very mysterious and powerful birds. Dorsey records that the Santee believe that there are 4 different manifestations of the thunderbirds, which are the carriers of Wakinyan's power. In modern-day South Carolina, there have been several sightings of pterosaur-like thunderbirds. In the summer of 2004, a couple driving towards Myrtle Beach hear a loud flapping sound described as like someone's laundry had come off the line and was getting blown around, like a big bedsheet getting hit by gusts of wind. Except we were in the woods and there were too many trees around for it to be laundry blowing around. Soon, a large, pterodactyl-like creature was reported flying after the car. After the encounter was over, a grayish snotty smear was stained over the driver's side of the window. Witness reported the creature to be white-colored. Dickens, South Carolina report. In 2013, a report surfaced of an encounter 3 years prior of a similar pterosaur-like creature. It had leather-like wings and was almost as big across as the windshield. I did not get a good look because it was dark, but it had almost orange-reddish eyes and swooped up before it smashed into the windshield of the car. The whole time I was pumping the brakes, afraid it was going to smash into the car. I told my parents, but they tried to convince me it was a bat. But I told them no, it was way too big. Then 1 year later, my dad told me he saw the same thing flying towards the windshield of his car on the same road and same spot. My brother also saw it in the backyard as he was taking out scraps. 1989 sighting. There had been a sighting between Greenville and Florence, South Carolina in 1989 by a witness named Susan Wooten. Susan was traveling on Highway 20 to Florence and the sighting happened in Wooden and Swampy area at 3 p.m. The wingspan is 12 to 15 feet, no feather, leathery wings, a head appendage behind the head, and it also has a long tail distinguishable from its feet.
When I was 20, I was driving from my home in Blacksburg, Virginia to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to have a vacation with my family. Though we had taken the trip many times when I was younger, I had never driven the whole way by myself. Due to my college schedule, I had to catch up with them 3 days into the trip. The extreme eeriness of rural South Carolina had never struck me before that trip. Once you get to SC 38 and US 501, small towns occasionally pop up around the highway. Many of these places are just whitewashed cinder block squares, some with business names, many with bars on the windows. They are not the kind of place you want to stop. On my trip, I missed a turn because of a growing rainstorm, then got turned around trying to find my way back. During this misadventure, I drove by a tacky black and red billboard for a strip club, advertising miles to Hawks Dive with bright yellow letters proclaiming dry spirits and moist flesh nightly, just past the pet store in Hawks Landing. There was an image in red scale that I couldn't make out. I shuddered at the thought when I drove by. Clearly advertising was not the owner's best skill, or they would have chosen different wording. That I saw this billboard shining through a growing torrential rain made it worse. A few miles on and the rain became too heavy to see the road, and I ran over something that popped one of my tires. I managed to keep control and pulled over immediately in an empty concrete lot on the side of the road next to a white cinder block building. Rusted metal grating covered its only window, and the door was a solid piece of metal with the words Pet Store stenciled in black. I had to look at it twice just to make sure I read it properly. The place couldn't have been more than 15 by 15 feet. It said in that this could be the pet store from the sign, and that placed me in Hawks Landing. I waited about 20 minutes for the rain to stop, but it never let up. It was already approaching dusk. I'd gotten a late start, and I really didn't want to stick around outside pet store after dark. Figuring I would have to put on the donut in the rain, I got my umbrella and popped my trunk. The rain outside drenched my pants even with my umbrella. I may as well have been wading through a stream. I realized quickly that with the puddle of water under my car it wouldn't be feasible to change the tire. I headed to the pet store to see if I could call a tow truck. A flash of lightning lit up the area just as I made it to the door and found it locked. The following rumble of thunder must have drowned out my first knock. The lights were on inside, but the windows were opaque. I knocked again, and the yellow light inside went off immediately. I knocked twice more, calling out that I needed a tow truck, but nobody answered the door. I looked around for another place to go and spotted a building across the road. This one was larger, with no windows, made of gray cinder block. Judging from the bar sign, I figured this was Hawk's Dive. I started to make my way over. When I reached the edge of the road, I saw the pet store lights come on out of the corner of my eye. I turned back toward the building and saw a tall, gaunt figure silhouetted in the window. A trick of the light inside made the figure look too tall. I couldn't see the top of his head even though the top of the window was about 7 feet off the ground. Unsettled, I quickly walked across the street, hoping for better luck. This time, I found the door unlocked, and I stepped in out of the rain. I don't know what I was expecting, but the inside was normal. It was a dark room with a bar against the right wall and a stage encircled by neon pink and blue lights against the far back wall. A single pole stood in the center of the dancing stage, which was currently empty, though there were lights fixed on the white curtains behind it. There was a scrawny man, about my age, wiping down the bar, and he shot me a surprised look when he noticed me. I walked up to the bar, which was squeaky clean but had a very sour odor about it. "Slow night. The entertainment hasn't gotten here yet," he said. He shot a glance toward the curtain, then back at me. "Do you need something? Do you have a phone book?" I cursed myself for not getting a data plan. I hoped the joke would lighten the mood. Instead, the young man just looked more tense. "I'll get it for you." I thought I heard bottles clinking under his feet as he walked over toward the far end of the bar, and figured he may be drunk on the job. He got the phone book and came back. "Look," he said in a hushed voice, "I'm happy to help, but you should probably call a tow truck from Conway and go back to your car. We're about to start nightly shows and they're not kind to visitors." He looked desperate. I heard the clinking around his feet again and quietly asked if he was okay. He sighed. "Look," he said as if he was going to start a sentence, then stopped and sighed again. He glanced down at his feet and I looked at him. Then he more emphatically nodded his head and looked down at his feet. I took the hint and leaned over the bar. His feet were shackled to the floor, with enough chain to traverse the bar. Judging from the odor, which got worse as I leaned close to him, he had been chained there for a while. That's when the music started, and all the lights went out except the ones behind the curtains. I looked up into his pale, wide-eyed face and he mouthed the word, "Run." I was frozen between wanting to help him and wanting to run. I glanced over toward the curtain, where a figure was starting to dance behind the curtain. It looked vaguely feminine, but the legs and hips were far too thick for the spindly torso, and the arms nearly touched the floor when it was standing upright. It moved with the jerkiness of a poorly controlled marionette. I turned and bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me just as I heard the curtains opening. The rain was still coming down outside, and night had come on quickly. I looked across the road toward my car, deciding I would take it and limp down to the next town. Anything to get away from that place. I made it to the edge of the awning before a long flash of lightning revealed several tall, thin silhouettes standing around my car. After the lightning flash, I crept over and hid behind the sign for the strip club. It was lit up, and I could see it was the same design from the billboard. I tried not to concentrate on the image. I didn't want to know what it was. When I peered out again, a quick flash revealed that they had changed positions around the car. Other than that, they stood perfectly still. I looked around for a better hiding place and saw a dark building beside the strip club. It looked similar to the pet store in dimensions. Between flashes of lightning, I hurried over to it, hiding next to a wooden sign which said candy store with a poorly drawn strawberry on it. I shuddered and turned toward the figures. They were now standing in the glow of the sign where I'd just been hiding. A flash of lightning and the two more joined them. From my hiding place I had enough light from the sign to make out one of them. It looked human except the proportions were wrong. Its dark clothing was fitted to its body. Oddly enough, it was wearing what looked like cargo shorts. It turned its head toward the others and appeared to be speaking. They turned in place and, almost too quick to track, were at the door of Hawk's Dive, then inside. I took the opportunity to sprint for my car. I stumbled through the muck until I reached the hard surface of the road, catching a glimpse of the sign again. I still couldn't make out the image on it, but I could see it had too many legs. That just pushed me to run harder. I made it across the road, gasping from terror and sprinting too hard. Fumbling for my keys in my soaking jeans, I looked all around for movement. Someone was standing at the entrance of the bar, looking my way with its head cocked. I found my keys and unlocked my door, watching it in the side mirror. Just as the car unlocked, the figure lurched forward and its feet lifted off the ground. Something protruding from behind its legs was keeping it upright, and it pitched backward like a ragdoll so its long arms dragged the ground. It started skittering toward me. In a panic, I turned to face it. It was standing upright again. I kept my eyes on it as I backed into my car. It didn't move the whole time I was looking at it. I put my key in the ignition, never taking my eyes off of it, and started the car. The figure stumbled forward awkwardly on its hind legs, its feet still not touching the ground. I reached to put the car in drive and put it in neutral by accident, hitting the gas and revving the engine. Again, the creature skittered forward on all fours until it was very close to the car, and then stood upright. I could see that its legs were non-functional. They dangled uselessly in front of its real legs, triple-jointed and dark. Likewise, its arms weren't actually arms. They were bent in too many places. It wore its face like wet plaster. It tilted its head again and regarded me with dark eyes, as I found the proper gear and sped out of the parking lot and onto the road. I found a filling station a few miles down the road that looked normal, and managed to get a tow truck from Conway to come pick up my car. I'd ruined the wheel on it, but all things considered that wasn't a problem. In the filling station, I saw a missing poster for the young man who had been chained to the bar in the strip club. I told the attendant that I'd seen him in the bar and thought he might be in trouble. I left out the parts that might make me sound crazy. She called the police about it. After she hung up the phone, she told me she was glad I'd found their filling station and I'd gotten out of Hawk's Landing. She'd never been there, but it gave her the creeps. Places like that strip club, you know. They just seem like poorly baited traps for desperate people. I don't think she knew how right she was. On my drive home, 5 days later, I saw a small, makeshift sign on the side of SC-38 that advertised Hawk's Dive. Now hiring, no experience necessary. A phone number was scrawled below, but I didn't stop to read it.
I was around 17 years old, in South Carolina, driving up from Charleston to Dorchester for a party with a friend of mine named Kyle. I was the driver, and he was the passenger. Now, I'd lived in South Carolina for 7 years, and spent another 6 in Sevierville, Tennessee prior to that. And I was in love with the wilderness. Nothing creepy had ever happened in all that time, regardless of how rural or backwoods I'd gotten. So, driving up there, the hour got late. We were on a stretch of lonely road with nothing but woods and swamp on either side of the road. No buildings, no houses, and no real civilization for around 30 miles ahead. And behind us, conversation was typical 17-year-old dude conversation. Dude, we're gonna get so wasted. I haven't seen these guys in forever. And so on and so forth. I have my eyes on the road, however, in order to make sure I don't slam into some random wildlife crossing by. With no lights in the woods at 1:30 in the a.m., visibility was fairly shitty. As I'm talking, I spot something around 500 feet up the road, walking along the side of the pavement towards our car, as my mind is on driving in convo. My first thought on the figure was probably some hitchhiker, or maybe someone's car broke down. However, as soon as I heard how strange both of those possibilities sounded, I started to watch the figure more closely. 1:40 in the a.m. Now, middle of the fucking woods, with no civilization for dozens of miles in either direction. And the road is one way. I haven't passed a car, or seen another car, in over an hour. Conversation slows down. As the figure gets closer, I realize something isn't quite right, because it's way too tall. Now that it's closer, I'm 5 feet 10, and my friend was 6 feet 1 and 245 pounds, but this thing had to have been 8 feet at least. And the body proportions were wrong. The arms dangled far below the hip, with humanesque hands with way too long fingers. I could not make out claws. But who knows, it was dark. The head was bald. The skin was pale gray-white, like a maggot, and mottled brown splotches, which may have been dirt or natural coloration, were mixed in. The eyes were black, large, and reflected light in a predatory way when the truck's lamps shone on them. The legs were bent oddly at the knees, but were quite long nonetheless. Couldn't make out the feet, but the hands were humanish, so I'd presume the feet were, too. The worst part was the mouth. Imagine a human mouth, where the lower jaw has been stretched and distended all the way down to the chest. The teeth were yellow and sharp. The mouth was red, but had no visible tongue lolling around. Conversation stopped dead. I flicked the high beams on, as it seemed to be quickening pace as we approached, moving in a very jerky and halting manner. And when the high beams hit, it shrieked in a weird, two-toned way, and made to move across the road, which was bad, because my reaction had been to slam on the accelerator in order to pass the thing by. We locked eyes as I approached, and I introduced that gray-skinned motherfucker to a Ford F-150 doing about 70. When we collided, everybody screamed, me, Kyle, and Stretch Armstrong, and the thing made a pleasingly solid thump upon impact with the right corner of the hood and bumper. The shrieking stopped abruptly and turned into a squalling moan, and the impact sent it hurtling into a tree on the roadside. We kept going. There was no blood, and only minor damage to the truck, I Love Steel, as we passed it. I told him to check R6, and he said, "It's down. I can see its legs. It's not moving." I nodded once, and stayed quiet for another 5 minutes. My friend, who was used to being a badass and playing high school football on the D-line, was visibly shaken. He was in his seat, and he was hyperventilating. I drove the rest of the way in silence. Got to the party, said hi so I could get through the door. Locked myself in the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and probably cried for about 15 minutes. No clue what road. I live in Miami now, and I'm 27. I don't really care whether anyone believes me. I know what I saw, and I saw it way before I ever even heard 4chan existed or knew what a Skinwalker was. I was a huge nerd, very much into D&D and other crap. So part of my issue was trying to figure out what fucking monster I even saw. It didn't seem to match any description of anything I'd ever heard of. All I knew was it wasn't human, and we gave it a black eye in exchange for a dented hood and scratched paint. So I knew it was solid and not some kind of ghost or hallucination. I actually decided to share the story, because some of the Skinwalker posts have mentioned them as being gray-skinned, naked men, which synced up exactly with what I saw. It's actually comforting to know other people have encountered them. And I hope it comforts the people who have encountered them to know that they don't seem to enjoy being broadsided by 3 tons of steel at 70 miles per hour.
I don't normally post on X, although I believe I shared this once, a few years ago. However, I'm too lazy to greentext in an entertaining way, so I'm just going to type my experience straight. When I was young, I used to stay often at my grandparents'. Most of my family has lived close by one another, on a couple hundred acres of land in South Carolina. That is to say, I could stay at my grandparents' often, because they lived well within walking distance away. There had always been talk of the house being haunted. Anecdotes, mostly. Great-grandpappy tucking my mother in when she was a child, after he had passed, that sort of thing. Regular stories you'd expect to hear from your grandparents. I never put much faith into them, and, really, I still consider myself a skeptic. Granted, this incident ignited an interest in the paranormal that I'm aware is at odds with my general disposition. So when I was 10 or 11, or maybe even a little older, I remember sleeping on my grandparents' couch. My grandfather turned in late, 1 a.m. late. I normally went to sleep not long after him, because I slept in the living room and that was where he watched his old movies and the late-night show. This particular night though, something definitely felt off in the hours before I went to bed. Like, the dogs, who were normally too energetic for their own good, were aloof. I remember that specifically because Marky didn't even bark and growl at me when I came over. That dog was one of those crazy poodles that would not shut the fuck up. Anyway, I woke up that night with what felt like a hand pressing down on me. Back then, I didn't know what sleep paralysis was, but today I do, which helps with the skepticism. Like I said though, that night I woke up to some horrendous pressure on my chest, and with my entire body being unresponsive. It wasn't pins and needles though. More like things had just stopped cooperating. The couch I was sleeping on was just beside the door, between a front-facing window and the front door, specifically. The latter was open, the screen door and storm door both, with the outside light still on and shining into the house. I remember a distinct lack of insect chirping. In SC, late at night, the crickets are always chirping. Standing in the threshold of the door was a figure. I can't recall much of its body except that the figure was absolutely masculine, because then, and in the intervening years, and now, I always think of it as a he. I want to say, but admit this may be memory after the fact, that the man's body was shadowed. Maybe because of the light, maybe because that's just how it was. Again, I can't recall much on that front, but what I can 100% remember is that he had a deer's head. Like full on a deer's head, with antlers and everything. and it stood over me. I don't remember it looming exactly, or staring at me in a threatening way. Actually, what I can remember is being really confused. Then, as well as after I woke up, as in regained control of myself. The confusion was, and still is odd to me. I'm not even sure the right way to phrase it. For a couple of years I thought I was a deer dreaming of being a human. I know exactly how fucking weird that sounds, and, no, I'm not, nor have I ever been, a furry. There was just this lingering doubt back then. I still don't think the explanation just then does the confusion justice, either. I don't really possess the words to describe it. Just the strongest disconnection with who I was, almost to the same degree that I imagine someone suffered dysphoria might feel. Except there was no shame or wrongness to the experience, just confusion. I never did stay at my grandparents' again, at least not until recently, when Hurricane Irma was supposed to hit. My grandparents' home is the best suited to weather a storm, so most of my family went there, and no, I didn't have another experience. What happened instead was that my youngest cousin went through a night terror, not just once but an episode every night while staying. Her mother told me earlier this morning that there was none last night, after they went him. I haven't spoken to anyone else about my experience, and I'm almost afraid to ask her what it was she had seen. Anyways, I mostly just wanted to get this off my chest, and I realize I don't have a talent for recounting things, so thank you to anyone who took the time to read this. Some of it may be off due to the decade or so that has passed since the experience, but most the gist of the experience is there.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.